Number 14. Ariana Celeste. American ring girl and model Ariana Celeste experienced the pleasure of having her unflattering tear-soaked mugshot published all over the internet following her arrest for domestic violence charges in May 2012. According to reports, the Playboy cover girl was taken into custody in Las Vegas during the early morning hours for allegedly attacking her boyfriend after a night of partying. The then 26-year-old, whose real name is Ariana Lopez, spent several hours in jail and missed the UFC 146 fights. All things considered, however, the situation could have turned out much worse. Lopez was released on $3,000 bond after seeing a judge and appears to have put the incident behind her. She went on to enjoy continued success with her career and even led some admirable charitable campaigns, including a fundraiser for hospital equipment during the COVID-19 pandemic. If nothing else, the brunette bombshell has proven that it is possible for a pro athlete to maintain a respectable image even after an embarrassing legal mishap. Number 13. Felix Vjo. In April 2021, Puerto Rican former professional boxer and Olympic athlete Felix Vjo was named a person of interest in the disappearance of his pregnant girlfriend, 27-year-old Keishla Rodriguez. She was found dead the next day, and in early May, Vjo turned himself in as the prime suspect in the case. The ex-fighter pleaded not guilty, and the case went to trial in 2023. Luis Antonio Cadiz, a friend of Vjo, testified as a key witness in the case after being charged in connection with Keishla's death. During Vjo's trial in 2023, he testified that his friend had pressured Keishla to get an abortion after finding out she was pregnant. Cadiz also revealed that on the day of Keishla's death, Vjo injected her with a substance that he believed was heroin. The two men then tied the woman to a cement block and tossed her off a busy bridge in the middle of the day. According to a pathologist, Keishla was still alive when she plunged into the lagoon below. A toxicology test showed that she had fentanyl and a horse tranquilizer called xylazine in her system when she died. Cadiz apparently felt remorseful enough to call the police anonymously and revealed the location of Keishla's body several days later. Keishla's murder triggered widespread outrage throughout Puerto Rico, with activists demanding that authorities take more heavy-handed action against perpetrators of domestic violence. Good news came after a lengthy 25-week trial when Vjo was found guilty of kidnapping resulting in death and causing the death of an unborn child. He was acquitted of 2 charges but nevertheless received 2 life sentences, much to the relief of those who were determined to see justice served. Vjo's lawyer announced plans to appeal the case following Vjo's sentencing in November 2023. Number 12. Cabar Salam. An unspeakable tragedy struck the New York City borough of Staten Island in October 2019 when a beloved 25-year-old Muslim activist named Ola Salam was found strangled to death and dumped in Bloomingdale Park. Someone had dragged her body there and tried to conceal her remains with leaves. Ola's father, former Egyptian pro boxer Cabar Salam, told the New York Times that his daughter had recently complained about someone tailgating her on a local highway. He claimed Ola had mentioned noticing a vehicle following her on several occasions. At the time, no suspects had been named in connection with the murder, despite speculation that Ola's estranged husband may have had something to do with her death. She reportedly had a restraining order against her ex at the time of her death, making it easy to cast suspicion on her former partner. Despite this, Ola's friends were baffled about who might want to kill the young woman, who volunteered at a domestic violence shelter, advocated for Muslims' rights in the United States, and dedicated her life to making the world a better place in many other ways. The case soon took a surprising turn when Cabar Salam fled the US just days after the New York Times interview. According to authorities, his claim about someone following Ola in the highway was a lie intended to mislead investigators. A nearly 14-month manhunt ensued, eventually leading to Cabar's capture in Kuwait in December 2020. The 55-year-old was extradited to the United States to face charges for allegedly killing his daughter. Once dubbed the Egyptian magician and known to some as one of the dirtiest fighters of all time for his trademark headbutts, Cabar became a fixture of the pro-fighting world after competing in the 1992 and 1996 Olympics. He passed his athletic skill on to his daughter, who was an avid boxer but also a dedicated pacifist who sought peaceful resolutions to many of the problems plaguing modern-day American society. Cabar's criminal case appears to be ongoing. According to SI Live, the judge overseeing the proceedings barred a plea agreement during a hearing in October 2023 and ordered for the case to go to trial. Number 11. Travis Hall. Before he became a title-holding professional boxer, Travis Hall was a Guyanese-born New Yorker from Queens who came from humble beginnings and had big dreams. Nicknamed the Black Mama, he turned his vision of fame into a reality when he established a name for himself as a featherweight champ in 2010. Hall's swift and sudden downward spiral came in 2014 when the 28-year-old was accused of killing his ex-girlfriend. 31-year-old Margarita Rivera was stabbed repeatedly in the chest and bludgeoned in the head in broad daylight before being left for dead along a street in Jamaica, Queens. As she lay dying from her injuries in a pool of blood, the young mother of two uttered the name Trey 3 times in reference to her attacker's identity. She was pronounced dead at a nearby hospital a short while later. Police found Hall unconscious in a dumpster later that day and arrested him on suspicion of murder. He was connected to the crime through a Home Depot receipt for the pipe that was used to bludgeon the victim, which he bought just an hour and a half before the attack. The receipt was found in Hall's pocket and contained an SKU number matching that of the murder weapon, and Hall was also seen buying the pipe on the store's surveillance footage. Hall's defense attorney argued that childhood abuse triggered him to kill Rivera, but the claims failed to hold up in court. The former boxer was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Number 10. Irvin Rivera. In an incident described by UFC officials as extremely troubling, Mexican-American MMA fighter Irvin Rivera was accused of trying to kill his two sisters in January 2021. Police in Boynton Beach, Florida, found the wounded women aged 22 and 33 years old at the time, while responding to a reported disturbance at a local residence. According to documents obtained by ESPN, the 22-year-old sister suffered from stab wounds to her head, back, and arm. Rivera's 33-year-old sister was found in critical condition with wounds to her back, arms, face, and hands, and was suffering from 2 collapsed lungs. Both victims survived after being rushed to the emergency room. Rivera fled the scene, but was taken into custody several hours later. He allegedly admitted to entering his sister's bedroom and stabbing them with a brass knuckle knife as they slept. It became clear to police that he wasn't in the right state of mind when he said he felt called to commit the attack by a higher power, and said that he believed he was fulfilling his purpose in doing so. The pro fighter's arrest came less than 4 months after his most recent UFC fight. In light of the incident, a UFC spokesperson said the organization would not be offering Rivera any bouts while the investigation was ongoing. Roughly 10 months later, Rivera was found not guilty by reason of insanity and released from custody. According to court documents, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and psychosis following his arrest. The attack on his sisters was reportedly Rivera's first violent episode, and he had cooperated with treatment. He agreed to continue taking his medication, which had proven highly effective at keeping him mentally stable, and even managed to avoid being committed to a mental hospital, which is oftentimes the outcome of these types of situations. His freedom remains contingent upon following certain rules set forth by the court, including living with family members who have agreed to monitor his condition and progress. The fact that Rivera's sisters were willing to testify in support of their brother was most likely a major factor in the judge's decision to allow him to go free. Rivera continues to fight professionally, but has not participated in any UFC matches since his arrest. Number 9. Viviane Oau. Brazilian fighter Viviane Oau began boxing professionally in 2014 after beginning her rise to athletic fame as a competitive gymnast. During her 5-year fighting career that followed, she held 3 world lightweight and featherweight titles. Oau retired from the fighting scene in 2019 after losing to opponent Terry Harper. After hanging up her boxing gloves, she opted for what seemed like a settled-down existence with her wealthy and much older Swiss husband, who was 27 years her senior. But that all changed in October 2020 when Oau was accused of murdering her husband. Known only as Thomas due to Switzerland's privacy laws, the 61-year-old victim was bludgeoned 19 times with a baseball bat just days before Obernauf's 34th birthday. Obernauf was charged with Thomas's murder, but maintained her innocence throughout the case. Prosecutors accused the former boxer of killing Thomas because he wasn't too keen on the idea of having a child through her chosen method of artificial insemination. Obernauf had a history of domestic violence, according to authorities, including a previous attack on a former partner, which only made it seem more plausible that she killed her husband. She was found guilty of murder in December 2022 and received a 16-year prison sentence, along with a 12-year ban from entering Switzerland. The disgraced ex-fighter is reportedly appealing her case. Number 8. Thomas Riley. After his fighting career had all but dried up, former pro boxer Thomas Riley landed at the center of not one but two major criminal trials. The first came in 2010 when he was accused of shooting his ex-girlfriend, Keisha King, in the head. King survived her injuries despite being shot 3 times and pointed the finger at Riley after emerging from a coma. Authorities charged Riley with attempted murder, and he spent nearly 2 years languishing behind bars in Florida while fighting to prove his innocence. The case was finally dropped after a re-examination of the evidence cast reasonable doubt on his accused role as the person who pulled the trigger. Trouble found Riley again 3 years later in 2015 when he was accused of shooting his wife, Lisa Amodio Riley, at their home in Lee County, Georgia. According to police reports, Riley dialed 911 at around 8:30 a.m. one day and told the dispatcher that he had found Lisa, an emergency room doctor, unresponsive. He said he didn't know what was going on, but that his wife was bleeding in another room. After being encouraged by the 911 operator to take a closer look at what was going on, a 32-year-old could be heard yelling that Lisa had shot herself. Lisa was pronounced dead at the scene, and authorities were quick to suspect Riley of committing foul play. Just a month earlier, Lisa had called the police and accused Riley of assaulting her and threatening her with a gun. Police arrested the retired boxer for the previous domestic incident while working to secure charges against him in connection with his wife's death. Following an investigation into Lisa's death, prosecutors charged Riley with multiple crimes, including malice murder and felony murder. Riley's attorney argued that his client was not guilty by reason of insanity. It was the only viable defense, according to the lawyer, but Riley disagreed with the approach, resulting in a bizarre courtroom outburst during his trial. Despite the defendant's protests, the public defender continued to argue an insanity-based defense, claiming that brain injuries from years of fighting had caused Riley to lose his grip on reality. A mental health ruling would have been Riley's best case scenario, according to the lawyer, who said repeatedly that the evidence was far too strong to argue that his client didn't kill the victim. Despite this, Riley shouted at the top of his lungs during one of his hearings, yelling that nothing was wrong with him. He also demanded another lawyer and accused his attorney of disrespecting him. The tantrum did little to help Riley's case, especially as the prosecution presented overwhelming evidence to suggest that he staged the scene in an attempt to make Lisa's wounds seem self-inflicted. During the trial, Keisha King took the stand to testify about her own experience as the survivor of a suspicious shooting involving the defendant. The eerily similar cases seemed to resonate strongly with the jury, who convicted Riley on all counts in mid-2016. He was sentenced to life in prison, plus 40 years, with no eligibility for parole. Number 7. James Butler. American former pro boxer James Butler Jr. became nationally recognized during his 8-year career, which lasted from 1996 to 2004. His biggest claim to fame, or perhaps infamy, came in the form of a sucker punch after losing a fight against his opponent, Richard the Alien Grant, during a charity event in late 2001. Hosted by ESPN2, the event was held in New York City as a benefit for police and firefighters who survived the 9/11 terrorist attacks on the city's Twin Towers just 2 months earlier. Just moments before Grant was announced as the winner of the match, Butler removed his gloves and approached Grant, as if to congratulate his adversary. In a markedly poor display of sportsmanship, he took a fist to his opponent's jaw, leaving Grant with a dislocated jaw and a laceration requiring nearly 30 stitches. Butler was convicted of second-degree assault and resumed his fighting career after serving 4 months at Rikers Island. His professional boxing days came to a disturbing end nearly 3 years later in October 2004, when he became the prime suspect in the murder of his friend, sports writer Sam Kellerman, who was found bludgeoned to death in his burned-out Los Angeles apartment. Authorities arrested Butler 5 days later at a California medical center where he was seeking help for bipolar disorder. Kellerman and Butler met and befriended one another as teens while living in New York City. Their friendship was considered unlikely due to their contrasting backgrounds, with Butler emerging as an up-and-coming boxer after growing up in a Harlem housing project, while Kellerman came from a prominent and privileged family. The two nevertheless bonded, and until Kellerman's death, it seemed like their connection was unbreakable. Prosecutors never offered an ironclad motive for why Butler killed Kellerman, but they speculated that the enraged athlete lost his temper after being ordered to move out of Kellerman's apartment. The state argued that Butler's ailing boxing career and romantic life put him especially on edge and made him more likely to snap. It was no secret that the defendant had a volatile reputation and a documented history of snapping without warning. His mental health struggles also offered some potential insight into what may have made him tick during that final, fateful interaction with his buddy. To avoid a trial and a potential murder conviction, Butler accepted a plea agreement and admitted to voluntary manslaughter and arson. He was sentenced to 29 years and 4 months in prison and will become eligible for parole in 2027. Number 6. Chris Benoit. By the time Chris Benoit became a WWE personality in the early 2000s, the Canadian pro wrestler was successful in his own right as a former world heavyweight champion. He enjoyed an unusually long 22-year career before his life fell apart at his own doing in 2007. In a triple tragedy that can only be described as heartbreaking and horrifying beyond words, police discovered the bodies of Benoit, his wife, and his son while performing a welfare check at the fighter's Fayetteville, Georgia home. As wrestling enthusiasts and sports experts alike struggled to come up with an explanation for the senseless deaths, many speculated that Benoit suffered from a steroid-induced rage disorder, better known as roid rage. Wrestling officials initially denied these allegations, noting that instances of roid rage tend to be sudden and not premeditated, while the evidence indicated that Benoit killed his family over a several-day period. In other words, it appeared as though the 40-year-old carried out his actions in a rather deliberate fashion rather than during a fit of unchecked emotion. But some experts have argued that roid rage comes in varying forms and that it does not always occur as an explosive tantrum with little to no warning. Writing for Slate, journalist Michelle Tsai argued shortly after the deaths that roid rage is characterized by a wide array of symptoms, including paranoia, mania, mood swings, impatience, and uncontrollable aggression. Tsai further pointed out that steroids can also cause bouts of deep depression and dark thoughts, and that the rage part sometimes happens in short outbursts, cyclical bouts, or a lengthy psychotic episode. Simply put, there may be more merit to the roid rage explanation than wrestling officials were ever willing to admit to. But it's more likely that we'll never know for sure whether Benoit was acting under the influence of performance-enhancing drugs, given the secrecy that the topic tends to be shrouded in, and because it's impossible to know what was going on in his mind at the time. Investigators reportedly found that Benoit and several other wrestlers had illegally obtained steroids that were non-compliant with WWE standards in the months leading up to his death. There was also speculation that years of having his head banged around in the wrestling ring may have damaged his brain and altered his behavior. Tests revealed that he was suffering from advanced dementia and had the brain of a typical 85-year-old, along with head injuries that have been linked with depression. After the findings regarding Benoit's brain condition and drug use came to light, WWE removed any mention of the deceased athlete from its website. The organization has remained mum on the topic ever since, as if to pretend that this dark chapter in its history never existed. Number 5. Willie Lee Shannon. 18-year-old beauty queen Jamie Walker's life was abruptly cut short in 1981 when she was kidnapped from her Las Vegas home, held for ransom, brutally assaulted, and then killed. The terror began to unfold when Walker's father received a phone call from the alleged abductors, who claimed to have the victim captive and demanded a $75,000 ransom in exchange for her safe return. During the conversation, Walker got on the phone and told her dad that her captors were not kidding. The young woman's body was found thrown off a bridge the next day. Investigators were quick to suspect Walker's neighbor, professional boxer Willie Lee Shannon, especially after hearing rumors that Shannon was often seen staring at and trying to flirt with the victim. But Shannon claimed he was training at the time of the murder, and law enforcement didn't have enough evidence to charge him with the crime. He was free to continue living his life, and the case soon went cold. A hopeful discovery was made in 2006 when advancing DNA technology yielded a deteriorated genetic profile from evidence connected to the murder. The profile linked Shannon to the crime, but it wasn't accurate enough for authorities to formally charge him in the case. They tried getting the former boxer to confess, but he refused, and the case remained officially unsolved for nearly another decade. Unfortunately for Shannon, DNA technology continued to improve, and investigators revisited the case as soon as they secured enough funding to retest the evidence. This time, the DNA profile was accurate enough to formally implicate Shannon as a suspect in Walker's murder. Authorities picked the 59-year-old up at his Sarasota, Florida home in 2010, leaving his fellow community members shocked and bewildered. They had always known Shannon to be a kind, grandfatherly type and couldn't picture him killing someone in cold blood, much less in the particularly brutal manner that characterized Walker's death. But as the experts say, DNA doesn't lie. Coupled with other evidence pointing towards Shannon's guilt, it was enough to convince the defendant that prosecutors had a reasonable shot at securing a conviction. He took a deal and entered an all-foot plea to second-degree murder, which meant that he maintained his innocence but acknowledged that the evidence was strong enough to find him guilty. The former pro fighter was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Records show that he passed away in 2020 while serving his time. Shannon was surrounded by a large gathering of supporters who attended every single one of his hearings and who believed wholeheartedly in his innocence. Many believed that a fingerprint at the crime scene that did not match Shannon suggested that someone else was responsible for Walker's murder. Prosecutors, on the other hand, argued that the fingerprint likely belonged to an accomplice of Shannon's who helped him carry out the crime. No other arrests have ever been made in the case, despite authorities claiming on at least one occasion that they expected to charge other suspects. Number 4. Phil Baroni. Former mixed martial artist Phil Baroni started 2023 out with an arrest for allegedly murdering his girlfriend in Mexico. The 46-year-old American ex-pro fighter was nabbed in the state of Nayarit just 5 days into the new year after he approached law enforcement and said his partner was unresponsive in their hotel room. Responding officers found the victim naked, deceased, and covered in at least 37 injuries, including multiple head lacerations. She was reportedly covered in blood and appeared to have been beaten to death. According to police reports, the fatal incident began as a verbal argument between the couple after the victim, identified only as a woman from Mexico City named Paula, allegedly admitted to sleeping with another man. Baroni, a New York native, was reportedly living in Mexico at the time of the deadly disagreement. The altercation eventually escalated to blows, according to Baroni, who admitted to throwing Paula into the shower after she refused his command to go bathe. According to the former MMA fighter's version of events, the woman slipped and smashed her head, and he helped her into bed. Things apparently cooled down enough for the victim to ask Baroni to go buy some beer and cigarettes. Baroni claimed that he returned to the room to find his girlfriend motionless and unresponsive. Authorities believe Baroni was under the influence of marijuana and alcohol when he told them about the altercation. He was arrested on suspicion of homicide and was being detained in Valle de Banderas shortly after Paula's death. Details have been slow to surface ever since news of the incident initially broke, leaving the future of the case unclear. Baroni's trial was supposed to begin within 6 months following his arrest, but it's unknown whether the proceedings have started. The has-been fighter's arrest didn't come as a huge surprise to those who remembered that just a handful of years earlier, Baroni defended his training partner War Machine, also known as Jonathan Paul Koppenhaver, who was handed a life sentence in 2017 for a severe case of domestic violence. Number 3. Axom Spate. By the time former American heavyweight pro boxer Axom Spate rose to fame during the 1990s, he was already carrying a dark secret that would not be discovered for years to come. The has-been fighter unexpectedly made news headlines in 2013, long after he had fallen out of the limelight, when he was arrested in connection with a cold case murder following a DNA breakthrough that implicated him in the case. Spate, who was 50 at the time of his arrest, was accused of murdering his former manager, Douglas Stumler, nearly a quarter of a century earlier. Stumler worked for the Los Angeles Housing Authority and managed boxers on the side. He included Spate among his clientele, and the two men had even reportedly lived together for a short time during the mid-80s. The 30-year-old was found strangled and stabbed to death in his LA apartment in 1987, following a disagreement with Spate over some stolen property. Detectives questioned Spate, but at the time they lacked enough evidence to charge him with Stumler's murder. The case went cold over the next several decades, while Spate continued to live his life, but his past finally caught up with him thanks to advancing DNA technology. In 2015, Spate pleaded no contest to voluntary manslaughter. He was sentenced to 11 years in prison, but passed away from a stroke in 2016, just a year into serving his time. Number 2. War Machine. Former MMA fighter and adult film actor Jonathan Paul Koppenhaver, better known as War Machine, has a long history of violence dating at least as far back as 2007, when he was charged with 2 counts of assault shortly after being released by the UFC. He tried getting back into the UFC in 2010 after serving 3 years of probation for his crimes, but the organization turned him away. Koppenhaver was convicted of felony assault later that year and spent a little over 2 years behind bars for his crimes. It initially seemed like the former fighter was on a better path after he began dating adult actress Christy McEnday, or Mac for short, in 2013, but this peaceful period was short-lived. After establishing a slightly more respectable image and avoiding any major public drama for about a year, Koppenhaver's violent streak took a turn for the worse. In hindsight, it wasn't hard to believe that War Machine mistreated Christie behind closed doors. Mac eventually reached her breaking point with Koppenhaver's possessive, jealous, and controlling behavior, and in 2014, she broke up with him. All hell broke loose 3 months later when Koppenhaver entered the woman's Las Vegas apartment uninvited and found her in bed with her new boyfriend, Corey Thomas. He was overtaken by uncontrollable rage and proceeded to viciously beat Thomas for 10 straight minutes, finally letting him go after he promised not to go to the authorities. Koppenhaver then beat up Mac for 2 hours before she managed to escape off her balcony while her attacker's back was turned momentarily. She ran to a neighbor who dialed 911, and Koppenhaver fled the scene. Mac suffered a host of severe injuries, including 18 facial fractures and broken bones, a broken nose, a fractured rib, a ruptured liver, and 12 teeth that were knocked out. Instead of manning up and facing the consequences for his cowardly actions, Koppenhaver spent the next week in hiding while posting self-pitying tweets. Authorities tracked him down in California through his IP address and charged him with 36 felonies, including several counts of attempted murder, kidnapping, and assault. The jury deadlocked on the 2 attempted murder counts, but found Koppenhaver guilty of 29 crimes, including kidnapping, assault, battery, domestic battery, coercion, and more. He was sentenced to life with a minimum of 36 years before becoming eligible for parole. About a year and a half after his sentencing, Koppenhaver claimed that he reflected on his actions daily and that he regretted what he did. He's reportedly engaged to his pen pal and has become a born-again Christian, but many people understandably doubt the sincerity of his claims of remorse. And now for number 1, but if you want to hear even more stories, stay tuned for some extra content that you might have missed. Number 1. Goran Gogic. In November 2022, American authorities announced the arrest of former pro heavyweight boxer Goran Gogic for allegedly trafficking billions of dollars worth of cocaine into and out of the United States. During his 11-year boxing career spanning from 2001 to 2012, Gogic scored 14 knockouts. He now faces the fight of his life as he attempts to clear his name as one of the biggest accused drug traffickers in American history. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, the 43-year-old from Montenegro and his co-conspirators moved staggering quantities of the drug across international lines via U.S. ports between May 2018 and July 2019. Gogic and his alleged accomplices are accused of smuggling the cocaine from Colombia to the US, where it was loaded onto commercial cargo ships and ferried to Europe for street-level distribution. Law enforcement reportedly seized 3 illicit shipments totaling 20 tons in Philadelphia in 2019. Valued at over $1 billion, the DOJ described it as one of the largest recorded cocaine seizures on record in the US. The feds arrested Gogic in Miami shortly after he arrived on the mainland following a boxing convention in Puerto Rico. He was nabbed while trying to board a flight to Switzerland. Gogic was charged with 1 count of conspiracy to violate the Maritime Drug Law Enforcement Act and 3 counts of actually violating the act. If convicted, he could face anywhere from a 10-year mandatory minimum to life in prison. The former pro boxer maintained his innocence through his lawyer, who said his client was surprised by the charges. According to a November 2023 update, Gogic plans to take the case to trial.
Number 10. Is this baby for sale? A mother was minding her own business at a Walmart self-checkout register in Crockett, Texas in early 2022 when a middle-aged woman approached her and began gushing over her son's blonde hair and blue eyes. She allegedly asked how much she could purchase the little boy for, which the mom initially laughed off as a joke, only for the woman to follow up with a serious offer. A probable cause affidavit obtained by NBC News accused 49-year-old Rebecca Taylor of telling the victim that she had $250,000 cash in her vehicle and that she was willing to hand it over in exchange for the child. Of course, the mom said no amount of money would do. She later told police that she asked Taylor to get away from her and her son, but that Taylor persisted with an explanation that she'd been trying to buy a child for a long time. A woman who was with the suspect asked what the boy's name was, and of course, the mother refused to tell them. However, they somehow managed to figure it out, according to the affidavit, which went on to state that the woman kept trying to call the boy over. The mother waited for the 2 women to leave the store, but encountered them again in the parking lot. She locked her children in the car while Taylor allegedly began screaming at her, offering $500,000 for the kid and standing behind the woman's vehicle. When it became clear that the situation wasn't going to de-escalate, the mom drove off and went to the police, who reviewed surveillance footage and concluded that it corroborated the story she gave them. Taylor reportedly slammed the door on law enforcement when they showed up at her house to question her, but there was nothing she could do to stop them from taking her into custody once a warrant was issued. She was charged with 1 felony count of participating in the sale or purchase of a child and bonded out for $50,000 as the case proceeded through the court system. Number 9. Creepy Cookie Monster and Evil Elmo. In early 2023, police in California received complaints from concerned families about a suspect in a Cookie Monster costume harassing innocent civilians near the Santa Cruz Beach boardwalk. It was just one of the numerous sightings that had flooded in over a several-week period. Responding officers identified the suspect as 59-year-old Adam Sandler, no relation to the actor, who reportedly makes a living by seeking out children who want their photo taken with the character and hustling their parents for tips. People found him creepy, according to a Santa Cruz police spokesperson, who advised the public not to engage with the man and to steer clear of him. Beachgoer Nick Padron told local station KRON4 that he encountered the costume-clad character, who he described as someone who seemed down on his luck. However, Padron said that the man didn't seem to be bothering anyone. But Sandler had a checkered history, according to past police and media reports, including a jail stint in New York for threatening to extort the Girl Scouts of America. Around 2015, he made headlines in San Francisco for dressing up in an Elmo costume and allegedly yelling at tourists who didn't tip him for taking photos with them. He was also rumored to be entangled in conflicts with local small business owners and was eventually banned from 2 popular tourist areas. During that time, Sandler told KRON4 that he was the victim of an unfair harassment campaign, and he insisted he had no psychological problems whatsoever. However, he also had a reputation for being a troublemaker in Los Angeles, where he allegedly threatened a business owner while dressed in his Cookie Monster costume. After the incidents in Santa Cruz began, authorities acknowledged that it's not a crime to be creepy in public, but cautioned people to immediately report concerns about Sandler's behavior to the police. A Santa Cruz Wharf spokesperson made it clear that he wasn't employed by, contracted by, or permitted by the city or any local business. In other words, while nobody could do anything to stop Sandler from hustling in the area, he didn't exactly receive a warm welcome. Number 8. The Woman in the Closet. When a 57-year-old man living in the quiet town of Kazuya in western Japan noticed food missing from his refrigerator on numerous occasions in 2008, he suspected he was the victim of repeated home break-ins. So in response, he installed security cameras. It wasn't long before he received a mobile alert that one of the cameras had detected activity within the home. The man called the police and reported a suspected burglary, but officers arrived to find his doors locked, his windows closed, and no signs of a break-in. However, they searched the interior of the home and found a woman hiding on the top shelf of the man's closet. The suspect, later identified as 58-year-old Tatsuko Horikawa, allegedly told the police that she was homeless and had snuck into the residence about a year earlier after discovering that the homeowner had left it unlocked. She put a mattress in the tiny closet space, where she managed to go unnoticed until the man realized food was disappearing. Horikawa took showers regularly when he wasn't home and was described by responding officers as neat and clean. But her days of secretly living in someone else's house were over, and she was arrested for trespassing. Unfortunately, it's unclear exactly what punishment she faced. Number 7. Intruder in the Crawl Space. Timothy Smith and his fiancée hadn't even finished moving into the house they purchased together in Gresham, Oregon, when they became the victims of a truly bizarre home invasion that left them feeling both perplexed and disturbed. The couple came home one day in 2019 to find that someone had eaten a cupcake, made coffee, drank some beer, played video games, and put some clothes in the washing machine. They discovered more things that were out of place as they inspected the rest of the house, as well as large holes in the walls of 2 different rooms. Smith found that the hatch to a crawl space had been left open and crawled inside, armed with a knife, while yelling for the intruder to announce themselves. Eventually, he encountered a man wearing his fiancée's Christmas-themed onesie, accompanied by a cat named Spaghetti. The suspect, identified as 38-year-old Ryan Bishop, was taken into custody on suspicion of burglary, criminal mischief, and theft. Spaghetti was a bit more difficult to coax out of hiding, but Smith eventually managed to capture the cat, who didn't belong to him. Later, though, the feline's owner was tracked down. After police searched the house, Smith found a stash of methamphetamine and other drug paraphernalia that law enforcement had missed. Smith told local station KOIN6 that the intrusion left him and his fiancée traumatized and uncomfortable in their own home. The first-time homeowners were excited to no longer be renting and to start a new chapter in their lives, only to have someone ruin it before they had even finished settling in. Number 6. Creep caught on camera. Residents in Lauderhill, Florida were terror-stricken in late 2022 when surveillance cameras captured a well-dressed man knocking on the doors of several homes with a machete in his hand. Footage shared by local station WSVN showed the mysterious visitor, clad in dress pants, a button-down shirt, and a tie, calmly approaching a home at 5:30 a.m. before tapping on the door several times with the large knife's handle. Then, he immediately turned around and walked away. It was the exact same scenario that several other community members reported seeing on their own home security cameras. Nobody knew who the man was or what he could have possibly wanted. One resident pointed out how the man didn't seem lost or confused, and that his actions seemed to be intentional. The unsettling sightings left locals understandably concerned about their safety, although law enforcement said that they didn't identify any crimes being committed based on the video evidence. Police classified the incidents as suspicious acts and stepped up their patrols in the area. They asked anyone with information to come forward, but it's unclear whether the man was ever identified or if the bizarre visits have stopped. Number 5. Burglar makes himself at home. A homeowner in Oklahoma City was surprised to find her front door ajar when she arrived home one day in 2013. However, the situation became downright terrifying when a man answered the door wearing slippers and politely invited her inside. She dialed 911, but when the officers arrived at the scene, the suspect's welcoming demeanor strangely continued. The man had a pizza cooking in the oven and was subsequently joined by his 2 daughters. It was as if he truly believed he was in his own home, according to Sergeant Gary Knight, who spoke with local station KFOR. The suspect, later identified as 35-year-old Montego Logan, allegedly told law enforcement that he lived at the house, but became violent when they asked for some sort of proof. They then took him into custody on suspicion of burglary and assaulting police. According to an arrest report, Logan's behavior changed noticeably during the ride to the police station when he mistook one of the officers, who was 5 years younger than him, for his grandmother. He reportedly went from being calm and sleepy to hallucinating and delusional, leading the police to suspect that he was under some kind of intoxicant or possibly experiencing a mental episode of some kind. Luckily though, nobody was hurt during the incident. Number 4. Cyclist attacked by naked man. A woman was riding her bike near Miami Springs, Florida one morning in 2022 when a naked man wearing only a cowboy hat approached and asked her if she had a crack pipe. When she said no, the man slashed her with a machete, landing her in intensive care with extensive injuries, including a fractured skull, a brain bleed, a broken arm, and a large cut on her hand. Police tracked down the suspect, 45-year-old Roberto Hercules, in a wooded area in the nearby town of Hialeah, where they found him sleeping naked in a tent with 2 cowboy hats next to him. He was camping out among some trees near a set of railroad tracks, where he appeared to be hiding from the law. Hercules was consequently charged with multiple felonies including attempted murder, armed robbery, and battery. The incident happened in an unincorporated area between Miami Springs and Medley, which Miami Springs is in the process of trying to annex. If the city succeeds, it will step up its police patrol in the area. Number 3. Demonic Mugshot. One night in 2017, a man knocked on the door of a Lancaster County, South Carolina home and asked the resident to call the police. When deputies arrived, he explained that he was invited over next door to the home of 24-year-old Morgan Varn. While he was there, Varn and another suspect, 23-year-old Jonathan McHale Robinson, allegedly robbed him at gunpoint, taking his cash and smashing his cell phone before letting him leave. 2 male visitors at Varn's residence complied with the deputy's orders to come outside, but Varn, Robinson, and a female visitor refused to exit the building. An hours-long standoff ensued as hostage negotiators unsuccessfully tried to make contact with the people inside. Neighbors were moved to safety and a SWAT team made entry, and luckily, they managed to apprehend the suspects without anyone getting hurt. Varn and Robinson were charged with armed robbery, kidnapping, and malicious injury to personal property, and Robinson faced additional gun charges. However, it wasn't the nature of the alleged crimes that drew widespread attention. It was Varn's mugshot, which garnered spooked reactions from social media users who described the woman's appearance as demonic and evil. The whites of her eyes were tattooed black, her face contained several tattoos, and she wore dark lipstick. And while the look wasn't most people's cup of tea, a few commenters said they thought the young blonde looked beautiful. Number 2. Creepy Clown. Halloween was more than a month away when a string of bizarre clown sightings terrified entire towns across the US in 2016. One incident happened in Middlesboro, Kentucky, where police responded to a call about a masked man in a clown costume crouching suspiciously in a wooded area near an apartment complex. At the scene, officers found 20-year-old Jonathan Martin in full clown costume. He allegedly admitted that he was trying to scare people. Because it's illegal in that part of the state for people to conceal their identity by wearing a mask in public, Martin was charged with the offense along with 1 count of disorderly conduct. In a statement following the incident, police in nearby Bourbonville, Kentucky, reminded the public that it's not against the law in and of itself to dress up, but that doing so in a way that creates an unnecessary sense of alarm in public is illegal. The agency even warned civilians against driving around dressed as a clown. It remains unclear to this day what sparked the strange clown costume trend in America, but many of these cases were undoubtedly the handiwork of copycats who thought it would be funny to strike fear into the hearts of their communities. Number 1. Machete-wielding maniac. Terrifying footage that went viral in late 2022 showed the moment a machete-wielding maniac tried to carjack a woman and her husband in Queensland, Australia. TikToker Ash Massacre spotted the clean-cut but seemingly crazed young man swinging the machete while walking through traffic. Much to her horror, he headed over to the car she and her husband were riding in. In the video, the suspect could be seen grinning while tapping on the car's back window. He politely demanded to be let inside the vehicle while raising the blade. At the time, the car was stuck in traffic, so speeding off wasn't an option. After failing to gain access to the vehicle, the man walked away. Shortly after the incident made headlines, police confirmed that they charged a 21-year-old suspect with threatening violence, unlawful entry of motor vehicles, and obstructing police. But the name of the machete-wielding psycho hasn't been released.
Thanks for watching. Would you rather be known around the world as a highly talented but allegedly evil person who is accused of doing terrible things, or a talentless, starving artist with a heart of gold and an upstanding character whose lifelong ambitions never panned out? Let us know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe. See you soon. Bye.